It was 5:30 in the afternoon when the staff at the daycare began to worry. Two little girls were still sitting there. One was 3 years old, the other was 4. Every other family had collected their children hours ago. Their mother, 38-year-old Kristina Yoksimovic, was known by everyone around her as a woman who was never late. Not once. She was the kind of person who arrived early and called ahead if anything changed. She never disappeared without telling someone first. But on the evening of February 13th, 2024, she never came. The staff called her phone. No answer. They tried her husband, Mark Reben. He didn't pick up either. The girls couldn't be left there alone, so the employees did the only thing they could. They contacted Kristina's father. The grandfather answered immediately, and the moment he heard what was happening, something tightened in his chest. He knew his daughter. He knew her habits, her routines, the way she moved through her days with absolute precision. This was wrong. All of it was wrong. He collected his granddaughters and drove straight to the house. The lights were on inside. Mark Reben was home. He didn't seem anxious or distracted. He wasn't pacing or searching for words. He looked completely calm, the kind of calm that, in retrospect, was the most disturbing thing about the entire evening. He invited his father-in-law in. He offered dinner. He talked with the girls, moved around the kitchen, filled the space with ordinary sounds. When he was asked directly where Kristina was, he said she had stepped out to take care of something. Kristina's father stood in that kitchen and knew that answer was a lie. His daughter would not leave her children at daycare, switch off her phone, and disappear without a word to anyone. That was not who she was. So while Mark turned toward the counter, the grandfather slipped quietly out of the living room and began moving through the house on his own. He checked the upstairs rooms first. Then he came back down and pushed open the door to the basement. There was a laundry room at the bottom of the stairs, next to the girls' playroom. In one corner of the room, stacked neatly on the floor, were several heavy black trash bags. One of them was not fully closed. He stepped closer. A strand of blonde hair was visible through the gap in the plastic. He bent down and pulled back the edge of the bag. Inside was the severed head of his daughter. Her hair was still tied back in a ponytail. He ran, out of the house, into the street, screaming for anyone who would hear him. Emergency services were called. Officers arrived, walked into the home, and placed handcuffs on the man who had spent the last hour calmly preparing dinner. Mark Reben was 43 years old. He was the son of a successful lawyer. He lived in one of the most affluent neighborhoods near Basel, and he had just been arrested for what investigators would come to describe as one of the most systematically brutal domestic murders in recent Swiss history. Subscribe to the channel and hit the like button if you are new here, because this is the kind of story that reminds you why cases like this deserve more than a single headline. And this one, as you are about to find out, had warning signs that were visible long before that basement door was ever opened. Kristina Yoksimovic was born on April 15, 1985, in Binningen, a quiet, prosperous suburb just outside Basel, Switzerland. She grew up there with Serbian roots, in a family that was hard-working and grounded. Binningen sits on a hillside above the Rhine, the kind of place where streets are clean and neighbors know each other's names. It was the only home Kristina had ever known. She was not someone who stumbled into the public eye by accident. In 2003, at 18 years old, she was crowned Miss Northwest Switzerland, a regional title that opened a door she had not necessarily been looking for, but walked through with the confidence of someone who understood what opportunity looked like. 4 years later, in 2007, she competed as a finalist in the National Miss Switzerland competition, standing among the most recognized young women in the country. Those experiences gave her a first-hand education in an industry that looks very different from the outside. The travel, the photo shoots, the casting rooms. Kristina moved through all of it with her eyes fully open. And what she saw convinced her that the most valuable thing she could do with that knowledge was not to keep modeling herself, but to use what she had learned to help others navigate it. She founded her own agency in Basel, Catwalk Coach, a coaching business built entirely from her own experience and expertise. She trained aspiring models in posture, presentation, and professional conduct. She prepared young women for the specific pressures of casting calls and competition rounds. She coached businesswomen in confidence and presence. One of her most notable students was Dominique Rinderknecht, who went on to win the Miss Switzerland title in 2013 and compete at Miss Universe. a result that Christina had a direct hand in preparing her for. People who worked with her described her in consistent terms: disciplined, organized, warm but exacting, someone who had built something real from scratch and expected the same standard from everyone she worked with. Former Miss Switzerland Lorena Santon, who was crowned in 2023 and had trained under Christina, said after her death, "We will miss you so much." Former title holder Krista Rigozzi told a Swiss outlet, "It's terrible, I'm really shocked." Alongside catwalk coach, Christina had also built a parallel career in IT recruitment, a detail that speaks to the full picture of who she was. This was not a woman who defined herself by a single role or identity. She was an entrepreneur, a coach, a professional in two separate industries, and a mother of two young daughters. She had built her life deliberately, layer by layer, entirely on her own terms. And then, in December 2016, Mark Reben entered it. Mark came from a world that looked, from the outside, like the natural complement to everything Christina had built. His father was a successful lawyer. He had been educated in commercial innovation and design. He moved through elite Basel circles, where background and reputation opened every door, and where the appearance of success carried enormous social weight. By the standards of that environment, the two of them made sense together. They married on August 25, 2017. They moved into a spacious, terraced house on a hillside in Binningen, the same suburb where Christina had grown up, the same streets she had walked her entire life. They had two daughters together, and for a period of time, the life they presented to the world looked like something close to ideal. Christina's social media became a carefully curated record of that image. Vacations, family outings, the kind of photographs that communicate abundance and ease without saying a word. In one post from August 21, 2023, less than 6 months before she died, she uploaded a photo of the two of them standing together on a beach at sunset. The caption was 2 words, "My world." Hundreds of people filled the comments with warmth and admiration. They were looking at the image of a perfect family. They had no idea what was happening inside that house. The first cracks became visible in 2022, when Mark launched a new business venture. People around him began noticing changes that they initially dismissed as the ordinary pressure of starting something significant. He became irritable, tense, prone to outbursts that felt disproportionate to whatever had triggered them. Friends and acquaintances told themselves it was work stress, that it would pass, that the pressure of building something new explained the edges that had appeared in him. But the edges didn't soften, they sharpened. Close friends of Christina later spoke to detectives under anonymity and described what was actually happening behind the walls of the house on Golden Hill. Mark, they said, humiliated his wife openly and repeatedly. He spoke to her with contempt. He dismissed everything she had built, everything she had accomplished, as though it carried no value. And he used the thing she loved most as a weapon against her, telling her repeatedly that he would take the girls, that he would remove her from the home, that she would lose her daughters if she did not comply. Christina was trapped, not physically, not yet, but in the way that domestic abuse traps people most effectively. Through fear, through isolation, through the steady erosion of the confidence that had once defined her. She had spent years building something, and the man who shared her home was systematically dismantling her from the inside. Eventually, she made a decision. She began quietly preparing for divorce proceedings. She was not going to give up her daughters. She was not going to stay. On July 22, 2023, 7 months before the events in that basement, the hidden aggression turned physical. When officers arrived, they noted visible marks around her neck. Someone had attempted to strangle her, but when officers asked her to make a formal statement, Christina told them it had only been a verbal argument. No complaint was filed. No investigation followed. The officers left. The case was quietly closed. Investigators who later reviewed that call understood exactly what it represented. A woman in fear of a powerful man, in a marriage where the financial and custodial stakes were enormous, making the calculation that a formal complaint would cost her more than staying silent. It is a calculation that women in her situation make every day. And it is a calculation that, in this case, had consequences that no one who left that house that evening could have foreseen. Once Reben was in custody, and investigators began constructing a full picture of who he was, they located a former girlfriend who agreed to speak with detectives. What she described was not a man who had changed under the pressure of a failing marriage. What she described was a pattern. According to her testimony, during their relationship, Reuben had allegedly committed a deliberate act of physical aggression that investigators did not view as accidental. The cruelty that surfaced in the marriage to Christina had not appeared from nowhere. It had simply waited. When Mark Reuben was arrested and taken into custody on the evening of February 13, 2024, investigators moved immediately to secure his electronic devices. What they found when they began working through his bank records, search history, and online purchase history was not a picture of a man who had snapped in a moment of uncontrolled rage. It was a timeline. Details that emerged during trial proceedings revealed that Reuben had studied the Atlas of Human Anatomy in preparation for what he did to Christina's body. He had researched, he had prepared, he had acquired what he needed in advance, and moved it into the basement of the house where his daughters played. The autopsy confirmed that Christina had been strangled before being dismembered in the laundry room using a jigsaw, a knife, and garden shears. Parts of her body were put into a blender, pureed, and dissolved in a chemical. The Knightley prosecutors, in their closing statements at trial, described Reuben's behavior after the killing as almost unbelievable in its cruelty and absurdity, stating that he had acted systematically and with a plan, and that his conduct demonstrated the full measure of his hatred toward his wife. The man who invited his father-in-law in for dinner that evening, who talked calmly with his daughters, who answered questions about his wife's whereabouts without flinching, that man had known exactly what was in those bags in the corner of the basement. The industrial equipment was already in the basement. It had been there for weeks, ordered online, delivered to the house, carried downstairs, and positioned in the laundry room next to the girls' playroom. Mark Reuben had purchased it approximately 1 month before February 13, 2024. A commercial-grade machine, the kind built for high-volume processing of dense organic material. Not the kind of thing you buy for a family home without a reason. Then, approximately 2 weeks before that evening, investigators found another transaction in his banking records. 2 large containers of a corrosive chemical substance, delivered, again, directly to the house. Quantities of that kind are not associated with household cleaning. They are associated with breaking down biological material and eliminating organic traces completely. When investigators laid those purchase records out in sequence, the equipment, then the chemical, then the date of the murder, the picture that formed was not a complicated one. Nobody buys industrial processing equipment and follows it weeks later with large quantities of corrosive chemical and then claims everything happened in a sudden moment of panic. The financial records documented something else entirely. They documented preparation. And there was one more detail that confirmed it beyond any reasonable doubt. During trial proceedings, it was revealed that Reuben had studied the Atlas of Human Anatomy in advance, teaching himself, from a medical reference text, exactly how a human body is structured and where its components can be separated. He had not acted in a moment of uncontrolled rage. He had researched, he had purchased, he had prepared a workspace, and then he had waited. When Mark Reuben sat down across from investigators inside the police station on the night of his arrest, the interrogation was recorded on camera. He was calm, composed, the same composure he had displayed while inviting his father-in-law to stay for dinner, while talking with his daughters in the kitchen, while the bags in the basement corner sat a floor below them. His first account was straightforward in its construction. He told investigators that when he had come home that day, he had found Christina already dead at the bottom of the staircase. He claimed the shock of discovering her body had overwhelmed him. He said fear of being suspected had clouded his judgment, and that in a state of complete panic, he had made the decision to dispose of her remains rather than call for help. Investigators listened. Then they asked him to explain how a panic response results in carefully sealed plastic bags, organized tools, and a methodically processed crime scene. Reuben abandoned that version and moved immediately to a second one. Now, he said, there had been an argument, a heated confrontation that escalated. He claimed Christina had grabbed a knife during the dispute and come at him with it. He said he had been forced to defend himself, that he had tried to control the blade, that she had been injured during the struggle, that her death had been an accident he had not intended and could not have prevented. He presented himself as a man who had been cornered by his own wife's aggression and had simply reacted. At the exact moment Reuben was building that narrative inside the interrogation room, a forensic team in protective suits was moving through the basement of the house on Golden Hill. And with every step they took through that laundry room, his story collapsed further. Inside the laundry room, investigators recovered an electric jigsaw, a kitchen knife, and garden shears. All carried traces of biological material. The blender had already been used. Forensic analysts found processed biological material mixed with tissue fragments on the rotating blades and inside the bowl. Nearby sat containers of corrosive chemical, their seals still intact. The room had not been the site of a desperate struggle between two people. It had been configured as a workspace, tools within reach, equipment running, protective plastic on the floor. The kind of environment that takes time and intention to create, not one that assembles itself in the aftermath of a spontaneous confrontation. Investigators concluded that Reuben had moved through the process deliberately, switching from one tool to the next, working methodically, never losing control of the sequence. A person operating in genuine panic does not sustain that level of systematic procedure for hours. What the basement described was not emotion, it was execution. The remains were transported to a forensic laboratory in Basel. What medical examiners found there settled every remaining question about what had actually happened. Reuben had allegedly taken Joksimovic by the throat, thrown her against the wall, then strangled her to death with a ribbon-like object, according to court records. The autopsy confirmed it precisely. X-rays revealed a fracture of the hyoid bone, the small horseshoe-shaped structure at the base of the throat that breaks under one specific set of circumstances: sustained, forceful compression of the neck. It does not break in a knife struggle. It does not fracture during a fall. It breaks when someone applies deliberate, continuous pressure to another person's throat and does not let go. There was no knife attack. Christina had been strangled. The autopsy also showed that Christina's body displayed signs of blunt force trauma, including cuts on her face and bruises on her leg, foot, shoulder blades, and the back of her head. Some of those injuries were consistent with the final assault. Others were not. Forensic examiners identified older injuries, fading bruises, partially healed marks, trauma that predated February 13th by weeks or months. The violence inside that house had not begun the afternoon she died. It had been accumulating for a long time. And then investigators found something that stopped even experienced detectives. While disposing of her body, Reuben had also removed her uterus. This resulted in an additional charge of desecration of the dead, filed by the Public Prosecutor's Office of the Canton of Basel, Fox 10 Phoenix. From a forensic standpoint, the act served no evidentiary purpose. It did not assist in the concealment of the crime. Criminal psychologists brought into the investigation were unambiguous in their assessment. They classified it as an act of extreme sadism, a symbolic expression of hatred directed specifically at Christina, as a woman, as a mother, as the person who had decided to leave him and take their daughters with her. Reuben was sent for comprehensive psychiatric evaluation. Specialists conducted extended interviews and psychological testing. Their findings were detailed and, in one crucial sense, devastating for the defense. The evaluation confirmed severe psychopathic traits, emotional emptiness, a demonstrated absence of empathy. Investigators observed virtually no genuine remorse across every interaction they had with him following the arrest. But the psychiatric conclusion simultaneously destroyed the most viable defense argument available to his legal team. Despite everything the evaluation revealed about his psychological profile, Mark Reuben was declared fully mentally competent. Specialists determined that on February 13, 2024, he had been fully aware of his actions at every stage. He had not been detached from reality. He had not been experiencing a psychotic episode. He had not lost control of his faculties. He had known exactly what he was doing. And he had done it anyway. Once the psychiatric findings were confirmed, investigators assembled everything they had: the purchase records, the forensic evidence, the browser history, the digital timestamps, the phone records, and reconstructed February 13th, almost minute by minute. That morning, according to investigators, Reuben went down into the basement before anything else happened. He prepared the laundry room, he positioned the equipment, he spread protective material across the floor and placed the cutting tools within reach. The workspace was ready before Christina came home. That afternoon, she returned to the house. Her plans for the day were entirely ordinary. Routine tasks, and then collecting the girls from daycare. She had no reason to believe anything was different about that Tuesday. According to the prosecution's reconstruction, Reuben attacked her without warning. No extended argument, no dramatic escalation. He moved to her, wrapped his hands around her throat, and applied force. Christina fought back. The physical disparity between them was too great. He did not release his grip. Investigators concluded he maintained pressure until all resistance stopped. He did not call emergency services. He did not move through the house in shock or confusion. According to investigators, he brought her body to the basement stairs, pulled her down into the laundry room he had prepared that morning, and closed the door. What followed lasted hours. He worked through the process systematically. The jigsaw first, then the knife and garden shears, sorting remains into black plastic bags. It was during this stage that he performed the act forensic examiners would later describe, and prosecutors would charge as desecration of the dead. And then, according to investigators reviewing his browser history, in the middle of that process, with the equipment running and the basement door closed, Reuben picked up his phone and opened YouTube. He watched entertainment videos. The machine continued operating beside him. He had planned to finish the process by dissolving what remained, using the corrosive chemical he had purchased 2 weeks earlier. The containers were already in the room. Then his phone screen lit up with calls from the daycare. The girls were still waiting. More calls followed. He declined them one after another, but the volume of incoming contact made one thing clear. People were going to start looking for Christina. The timeline he had planned was no longer available to him. He put the phone down. He abandoned the chemical containers, their seals unbroken. He cleaned the blood from the floor, moved the bags to the corner, and turned off the basement lights. Then he walked upstairs, washed his hands, and went into the kitchen, because Christina's father was about to knock on the door. And Mark Reuben was going to invite him to stay for dinner. His legal team filed immediately for release on bail. The argument was standard. Their client should remain free under conditions while awaiting trial, rather than in pre-trial detention. The court rejected the application. After reviewing psychiatric evaluations and the documented scale of what the case files described, judges determined that Reuben posed an extreme danger and that the risk of future aggression was too significant to permit release. He remained in custody. He then went largely silent. He never provided investigators or prosecutors with a genuine explanation for why he had done what he did. No honest accounting. No motive offered that corresponded to the evidence. The self-defense claim had been entered and abandoned. What replaced it was silence. The trial proceedings were considered so graphically severe that the public was barred from the courtroom entirely. Journalists covering the case were required to sit in an adjacent room. The evidence presented inside that courtroom was not considered suitable for an open public sitting. On May 13, 2026, Judge Daniel Schmid delivered the verdict at the Basel Landschaft Criminal Court in Muttenz. Mark Reuben showed no emotion as the guilty verdict was read. He was seen to slightly stumble as the judgment landed. He was sentenced to life imprisonment. Judge Schmid ordered Reuben to pay 100,000 Swiss francs in compensation to the couple's 2 daughters, 120,000 Swiss francs to Christina's father, 100,000 to her mother, and 60,000 to her sister. Entertainment now. Approximately 50 people had gathered outside the courthouse in Muttenz on the day of the verdict. Police were called in to manage the crowd. When the sentence was announced, the crowd outside responded with applause. Inside the courtroom, the family's attorney read a statement from Christina's mother. "I stand here today in court as a mother who has lost her daughter, whose children miss their mummy every day. She was loving, protective of her children, and gave them everything." Certain. Judge Schmid addressed the court before the session closed. "There are cases that make fiction become reality," he said. "This case has changed our reality. No court ruling can fill the void left by the loss of a loved one. We as a court will also never forget you and will carry you in our hearts." 2 young daughters are now growing up without their mother. The legal proceedings over their future continue, a custody process involving Christina's parents and other family members, with child welfare authorities working to determine what arrangement can genuinely guarantee the girls' long-term stability and safety. They were 3 and 4 years old the night their grandfather found what was in those bags. They will carry that history without ever fully understanding it. Christina Joksimovic built her life deliberately and completely on her own terms. She won a national title at 18. She founded a business from nothing. She trained women who went on to represent their country. She was a mother who, by every account of everyone who knew her, gave her daughters everything she had. She had decided to leave. She had made the hardest decision and started preparing for a future that protected her children. She had called the police when the violence turned physical. She had done what people are told to do, and none of it was enough to protect her from the man who had already decided what was going to happen in that basement. Cases like this one leave something behind that a verdict cannot fully resolve. Not just grief and not just outrage, but the specific uncomfortable weight of the warning signs that were visible and the moments where a different decision by someone in the system might have changed the outcome. The July 2023 police call, the marks around her neck, the report that was filed and the case that was closed. Christina deserved better than that evening gave her. Please subscribe to my channel and leave a like on this video. These are the stories that need to be told carefully and completely, and your support is what makes that possible.